Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you are a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you.
Hello, revolutionaries. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Customer Service Revolution. I am John DiJulius, Chief Revolution Officer of the DiJulius Group.
And I am Dave Murray, the Senior Consultant for the DiJulius Group, and today's going to be special. Today, we are featuring Howard Schultz, one of our favorites. As a matter of fact, I was at Starbucks this morning. I grabbed an iced today, John, because we're going to have record heat here in Cleveland, Ohio today. Did you know that?
I know it's a beautiful day. We've had a beautiful stretch of weather here in good old Cleveland. I am excited, Dave. I mean, you won't be surprised. Maybe our listeners will, but I couldn't sleep last night.
I believe it.
I mean, like, if you've ever heard me speak, read any of my books, far and away, Howard Schultz is my favorite entrepreneur, a mentor from afar. His 3 books that he's written all were my favorite books at the time. And I just love everything about him as a leader, what he's done, for his employees, the experience he's created that revolutionized not only the coffee industry, but every industry. And his take on social corporate responsibility. So I'm excited.
I am as well, because, the words of Howard Schultz and his actions as a leader and what he's done to build Starbucks has created so much useful content for us in our consulting business. Then when you add in the fact that the DiJulius Group got to work with Starbucks years ago, and we'll talk about that in a little bit during today's show, and the great stories and great KPIs that we can talk about from that experience, today is going to be a great day.
It is. Before we get into it, we would love to tell you, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Customer Service Revolution podcast. Please review the podcast. And you could subscribe on all the typical places wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. Please subscribe, review, and if you're really happy with it, share, tell others. It's growing. In a short amount of time, we have some outstanding reviews on there, and that's really important to us.
And the bottom line is this: if you're focused on service, if your organization is service-minded, you will get some takeaways from this podcast that you can take back to your company and implement and see some results. And that's why we're here. We want to share what great organizations are doing to help you provide better results to your customers. So again, make sure you subscribe, make sure you review, and please share with folks that you feel will also benefit from this great content. Again, you can listen on Apple, Google, Spotify, and of course, Stitcher.
And we've had several outstanding podcasts that we've already released that you could find at TDG, the DiJulius Group, TDG.click/podcast. Again, you want to say that maybe better than I did?
Sure. It is TDG.click/podcast.
And we've already had some amazing interviews with senior executives from the Ritz-Carlton, James McManaman, who's Ritz-Carlton royalty. We've had some great Tina and Mike Hodges, founders of Advanced Financial. That was a great interview.
I got to spend a wonderful 45 minutes with Alden Mills, Navy SEAL and leadership guru, who really shared some fascinating information about leadership in your organization.
Jesse Cole, the owner of Fan First Entertainment and the P.T. Barnum of the sports world. There's so many great podcasts.
And don't forget about the first one, John, you talking about leading in a crisis as we were entering the COVID quarantine and all those things that were happening.
Yeah. So please go listen to any past episodes, tdg.click/podcasts. All right, Mr. Murray, you ready?
I'm ready. Let's get rolling.
I am so ready. So I don't know if you know this or if this is, common knowledge of people who haven't stalked every part of Howard Schultz's world, but a couple surprising things. He grew up poor in the projects of Brooklyn, New York. Had a difficult childhood, as one of his motivating things of what he's done, why he's been so good to his employees is when he came home at a young age, he saw his dad lying in a full body cast. This is probably in the 60s, early 60s. And he, had a laborer job and got hurt, fell at work. And back then they had no workers' comp, and he lost everything. He not only didn't have a job, he didn't get paid, he didn't get workers' comp. And that, and he said that kind of crushed his dad's soul at the time. And that's why Howard was always focused on making sure that, I think his quote was, he wanted to build his company his dad would be proud to work for.
Love that.
So he's not the founder of Starbucks. He was, when he graduated from school, he was selling kitchen equipment, and he had this little company out of Seattle that kept on ordering, and was quickly becoming his best customer. So he got on a plane, flew over, and it was Starbucks, but they weren't the Starbucks we know it. They were just making the coffee beans and selling it to maybe retailers and maybe coffee shops. And Howard took a job with them, and he then they sent him over to Italy, and he saw the cafes, which he saw the future. And he came back, and he fell so in love with the theater of the cafes in Europe that he started bugging the owners. They needed to open, cafes in the U.S., and the owners wouldn't want to do it, and Howard wouldn't stop to a point where he had to leave the company because he was frustrated with the owners wouldn't take the vision that he wanted. The owners didn't want to go that route. They liked where they were. So years later, he got a group of investors and he purchased Starbucks. And he then started opening Starbucks as we know it and literally transformed an entire industry. And today, one of the most recognizable brands in the world.
Not only did he transform an industry, you can say that he transformed retail and hospitality, right? Because they've become the gold standard, and what they deliver not only to their team members but to their customers, other organizations now try and emulate.
I agree. I mean, listen, the DiJulius Group is a B2B, business-to-business consulting firm, and we model a lot of the things we've learned from Starbucks. So it expands to any industry.
Absolutely. So here's what's going to happen today on this episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. We went through and found some of our favorite clips of Howard. A lot of them, as I mentioned earlier, we use in our own consulting business because either we were part of the creation when John was out in Seattle working with Starbucks, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, or other things that we use when we're presenting about customer experience. And we're going to play some of those clips and then share some of our takeaways from those. And I got to share with you, there really wasn't a lot of research involved. You had most of these clips at hand already.
I have so many videos and audio clips of Howard and have written about him in all 5 of my books. And like I said, there's no lack of, we didn't have to do any research for this because we've both been doing it for the last 20 years.
Right.
So the first clip we're going to listen to is just a short clip of Howard talking about how he got started in the industry.
Schultz had to convince investors that Americans would actually shell out high prices for a beverage they were used to getting for 50 cents almost anywhere. Most Americans didn't know a high-grade coffee bean from a teaspoon of instant Nescafe. In fact, coffee consumption in the U.S. had been going down since 1962.
If I came to you in 1987 and I said to you, even though coffee consumption in America is down, I want to build a company that was going to sell coffee not in a porcelain cup, but in a paper cup with Italian saying words that no one could pronounce for $3 a cup of coffee. Would you invest?
What about that? I love that.
So my first takeaway from hearing Howard say that is I can't even picture coffee consumption going down where we are today, right? I mean, whenever you walk through any airport or drive by a Starbucks, the lines are so long. At an airport, Starbucks is always the longest line. I can't picture a time where coffee consumption was going down, but again, it goes back to how they really changed an industry.
There's just our first clip. There's so many things from it, right? Coffee consumption was going down. I read a study one time that, back in the 80s and 70s, price was 90% of consumers bought based on price, which would tell me, all right, you can never make price irrelevant, right?
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite quotes is, don't ask the customers what they want, give them what they can't live without. So, if you would have done focus groups in the mid 80s and say, what would you like in a coffee drinking experience, right? Your coffee drinkers would have laughed at you. A coffee what?
Right.
There's two options, with or without cream, with or without sugar for 25 cents, or you can get it free a lot of places. I don't think anyone would have said, hey, I'd like to be able to spend 10 times as much. Oh, like that answer, write that down. Mm-hmm. I don't think someone would have said, I'd like to be able to order over 170,000 different ways. That's a true number.
Yeah.
There's talk about customization,
right?
Personalization. That's a true number. And I doubt, someone else would have said, well, I'd like to be able to hang out here in a room that's as comfortable as my living room for 15 minutes or an hour and a half and be able to crank out some emails, do an interview, or just read a book.
Right.
So you wouldn't have gotten those answers, and you wouldn't have gotten the Starbucks experience. And I love that. I mean, this is the epitome of so many things. Henry Ford said, if I would have asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses.
Right.
And that's what we've seen so many great companies do. If you think about every revolutionary companies, from Southwest to Uber to Starbucks to Apple to Lululemon, they didn't do focus groups. They didn't ask customers at the time what they wanted. And this is the epitome of making price irrelevant.
It really is. And he was creating a new category. Really, when you think about it, he was creating a new retail category that didn't exist prior to Starbucks. And so I don't ever remember reading about this, John. Maybe you have, and I just missed it. But so no one could picture this concept in their minds. So how did he get his investors? Like, how did he get them to buy in? How did he get them to say, yeah, we'll give you money for that? Because everything in the economy was saying this isn't going to work.
Yeah, and he details it in his 3 books. And I'm looking forward to having a future episode on his most recent book, From the Ground Up, which I read and now I'm listening to. And it just goes to my obsession. But every time he speaks, and it talks about that, to me it's riveting because his initial investors try to take it from him.
Yeah.
Kind of like what happened to Steve Jobs. Literally happened to Steve Jobs. It happened to Elon Musk in his first 2 companies where, he started them and then they got rid of him. And they almost did with him because it might have been, close to 10 years before they made a profit.
Right.
And investors aren't that patient.
Right.
So, yeah. And so our next clip is what Starbucks stands for. And I love this. Just so much more than the typical business.
This is how we feel. We love this company. We love what we do. We're passionate about coffee. We're passionate about the beverages we serve. We don't want to be in the transaction business. We're in the business of human connection and humanity, creating communities in a third place between home and work.
So there it is. You talked about before, that third place, right? Again, that didn't exist before, right? No one No one went somewhere to get coffee and hang out for hours on end.
And again, that was a 40-second clip. And what he says there, we're about creating human connections. We're about creating humanity. And the third place, and so the third place, which is so much more relevant today, because we really don't have three places, currently,
right?
Coming out of the COVID crisis, we don't have physical workspace. But the third place, which Howard Schultz refers to often as, the major reason why Starbucks was successful, is because, most people have work and home life, and we need a third place that we can get away from for 5 minutes or an hour and 5 minutes that, isn't just those two things. And as we get out of our young 20s, it replaces the bar scene, I guess.
True. And
having that third place where we can just go and talk to someone or someone in our community and be part of a community and the sense of belonging is really cool.
The other thing about it is that when you think about the traditional quick service experience, so they're direct competitors in the coffee business, but also quick service restaurants in general. They were focused on turning customers. They didn't want you to hang out, right? When you visualize a quick service restaurant, usually it's kind of those hard benches and sterile tables. It wasn't inviting to hang out for a while. And so really he was going against the grain of what was happening at the time in the industry.
Well, and most, fast casual, fast food, over 70% of their revenue is from drive-through. And that's great, right? But again, like you just said, he was going against that and knew that, and this is, 30 years ago, our society was lacking. Pendulum has swung so far over to, transactions that we want a sense of belonging. And I mean, that's the really cool thing. And again, now fast forward to today, I remember when, Ohio reopened, right? I remember before it reopened and we were all in quarantine, I was so excited during the day on a Friday. I remember this because that night I was going grocery shopping because they were the only things that were still open. But literally, kill me, I don't want to go grocery shopping, but I was so looking forward to just getting out.
Yeah.
And then when the restaurants finally reopened, oh my God, me and Claudia were going out to dinner and I ran in and showed her 4 shirts and 4 sport jackets. And it was just so much fun. And then when we went to the restaurants, it was social distancing. Every other table had to be, vacant. So there might have been 5 other couples or families in the restaurant. And everyone said, hey, how are you? And we didn't know anyone. They didn't know us. But everyone was so excited to see and engage. And that's why I think creating experiences, human interactions, the relationship economy is so key now more than ever.
Absolutely. And we had a similar instance in our house, John. The Starbucks closest to us in our town during the stay-at-home order was actually closed for some of the time. They don't have a drive-through. So they actually shut down during some of the stay-at-home. And when they announced their reopening, there was actually a countdown going on in our house. They opened on a Wednesday and we heard about it on a Sunday. And my wife and daughters had a little countdown going and they couldn't wait to drive down and go to our main Starbucks once they reopened on that Wednesday morning.
And think about that. There's so much to the Starbucks model and, how it revolutionized and how it made price irrelevant. It doesn't win a lot of taste tests. A lot of people don't necessarily love, their coffee more than anywhere else. Yet they're willing to drive by, umpteen other coffee places that are closer to where they work or where they live and pay significantly more. I mean, that's crazy. The experience is so compelling that, and it's not a good business decision, right? that you're going to pay $5 for something you can get for $3.50 or less elsewhere, and arguably just as good.
Right.
But you and I and your wife and millions and millions of other people do it every day.
Yes.
I mean, it goes against every logic.
Mm-hmm. Did I ever tell you that I had a little chat with my wife, Tracy, because I realized, or I was speculating, that I think she was putting more money monthly into her Starbucks app than she was into her 401k at work. So we corrected that.
But in every financial book or speaker about how to save more, they will tell you what a $5 latte
that always
daily
comes up.
adds up.
Yes.
Right? And so then you're like, oh, they're right.
Yeah.
I should get my Keurig. I should, make coffee at home. I should drink the coffee at work. Yet all those people, it hasn't hurt Starbucks one bit.
Right.
Right? So let's go on to this next clip that talks about how Starbucks has created that compelling experience.
Right.
But I believed very strongly that we could build a different kind of company. I never believed, I think it would have been arrogant to believe, that we could have 1,000, 2,000, or 7,500 stores in the U.S. and around the world. But something really magical started happening. And it started happening as a result of not advertising or conventional consumer classical marketing. The fact is that Starbucks spends very little on traditional advertising. It started happening because we demonstrated to ourselves and now the world that to build an enduring, sustainable, long-term business and consumer brand, it's not about fancy marketing. It's about establishing a very powerful and unusual emotional relationship with the customer.
Now, I love that clip,
Can
John.
we listen to that again?
We probably should. So the funny thing is we listen to that weekly, right? Because when we're out there presenting on customer service, we use that clip all the time because it really shows a couple of things. How important that emotional relationship is that you create with your customers and how that's going to build that bond, build that rapport that insulates you from things like price. But also we use that clip because it's so important to show how service has to start at the top, right? It comes with leadership. If Howard Schultz didn't care about the customers, if he just had a department somewhere, then Starbucks wouldn't be who they are today. The fact that the service, the relationships they're building with their customers literally starts from the top and works its way throughout the entire organization is so important.
Well, yeah, Dave, what's the first thing we both open with is, what you need. And we honestly screen clients that want to hire us, right? We say you need two things. One, executive sponsorship, and the other one is like a chief experience officer, someone that's, project leader that's going to sleep, lose sleep at night over this. But so, we talk about this in all our presentations, what executive sponsorship looks like. And, we always say, look at the companies that are, the best, Disney, Amazon, the best at customer service, Zappos, Starbucks, Virgin Airlines, it's a short list. And then, we show a video of Walt Disney, Richard Branson, Tony Hsieh, Steve Jobs, Howard Schultz, Jeff Bezos speaking. And the point to it is you can't read an article of them being interviewed, watch a video, and you can't find an article or a video of them, regardless of the topic, where they don't bring it back to how it affects the customer experience. I mean, they are obsessed, and Howard Schultz is obsessed and has always been, and 10,000 stores. And what did he say? We spend very little on advertising and marketing. All those companies do.
Right. And
you can see why all those companies are great, because their leader is obsessed, founder, which, if you're going to work for them, it's not great.
Right.
Get on or get off, or you probably can't even get on. Like, to some people, you're like, dude, you're a little crazy, right?
Yeah.
I just want to cut some hair or, wait on some tables or be a lawyer, and they aren't going to fit. But the other people are like, oh my God, like, this is I've been a customer. This is why I want to be part of your culture. And then you see the opposite, the worst customer service companies. Mm-hmm. And the one we pick on the most is Spirit Airlines.
Right.
And their previous CEO, punished a dying veteran, because he wouldn't give him the $15 back or the $190 back when the veteran, senior citizen, booked a flight, then found out he had esophagus cancer and he was going to die. And, the doctor said, don't fly. And, the CEO said, no, you didn't buy insurance for $15. And that's doing, all over social media. But you just see the two opposites of, that's why they're the worst. Mm-hmm. In customer service, because it starts at the top. And all those other companies, that's why they're the best, because it starts at the top.
It starts at the top, and it's reinforced throughout the organization, which I think is so important, that when it comes to customer service, it's not a department. It's not a day of training. It's not a focus for a week. It's truly part of your culture. And everyone we talked about so far, Disney, Virgin, Zappos, and especially Starbucks, they have built that into their culture. It's who they are. In Starbucks' case, focusing on that emotional connection is so important to them. And you feel it when you walk in. Even if you're walking into a Starbucks for the first time you've never been to before, you feel that connection as you walk into their location. It's so important to be more than just one day of training or one department.
And the last sentence he said in that quote, I love, in order to, build an enduring, sustainable, long-term relationship with your customers. I'm not saying it word for word, but it's not about fancy marketing. Mm-hmm. It's about building an emotional connection.
Yep.
And that's so important. Like, been thinking a lot about this lately, like, because we help clients create their customer journey mapping, every touch point. And the thing is that, we have to make, our clients, and clients have to do this, is where's the feeling mm-hmm. in this stage? How are you making them feel? And are you intentionally creating feeling, right? I mean, that is everything, is how someone feels. That you have to make them feel something. And all the great brands make you feel something. Part of a community, an emotional connection, right? And otherwise, you better be the cheapest.
Right. And it goes a long way with what you talked about before, John, where we can become so transactional and not focus on that connection. It's really easy. And sometimes as organizations, we almost train our employees to do just that, right? We want them to be efficient. We want them to get down their list of things to do. And that's important. But if we're doing it and removing that opportunity to make that emotional connection, then it's really not going to get us very far.
Well, and think about that. That's why, like, some of our most popular pieces of what we train people on in the, face-to-face world, 5 E's, mm-hmm. right? That take less than 5 seconds. The first 3 take, 1 second to do simultaneously. Eye contact, enthusiastic greet, ear-to-ear smile. Right? Dave, that's it. I just did it.
Yep.
Eye contact, enthusiastic greet, ear-to-ear smile. Engage and educate, right? That's a different interaction than you're going to get 99.9% of the other places. And then the other piece that people love, and in the new book, The Relationship Economy, is Ford.
Yes.
Right? We should be listening for, focusing on, people's Ford, F-O-R-D, family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. And there's obviously ways to do that where it doesn't sound like, but if I can learn 2 or more things of whoever I'm talking to's Ford, I not only built a relationship, I own the relationship, because to each and every one of us, our Ford is our hot button. brands.
Yep.
You know, that you're married and your wife Tracy works at Progressive, and you have 3, beautiful children, and one is graduating from, high school, or just graduated from high school, and is going to, starting college in a few months, and, you love to run. All those things, whatever they are, you find those things out, and it turns it from just a transaction, yes, no, to a relationship. And, it's an old, overused cliche, but it can't be more true. People like to do business with, people they like.
Yep.
And that is so true. Or you better be the cheapest.
I love the saying that it's easier to fire a piece of paper than it is to fire a friend, right? So it's easy to say, when you get that invoice, say, I'm done with you, as opposed to having to call you up and say, hey, I want to end my contract, right? And so that's so important to be focusing on those relationships. The other thing that I love about Ford, John, before we move on to the next clip, is when we deploy Ford with any organization, and I just spent some time virtually with a client of ours yesterday introducing Ford and creating a focus on Ford with them, is it makes sure that it gets them back to active listening, right? It's a focus on being in the moment with that customer, that vendor, that fellow team member, whoever it is. It's not exclusively just for customers of yours. It could be anybody that you're working with, and focusing on actively listening to what they're saying, and then using that information to build that rapport.
Well, my favorite thing about our methodology and what we teach is, so what I'm totally against, and this is kind of why, I probably got into writing a book and all this, is because I've always been obsessed since, my first business we started almost 30 years ago, at creating a world-class customer experience.
Right.
But I didn't know how.
Yep.
And I knew that was going to be our differentiator, or needed to be. And so, every book I read and every speaker I sought out, they would tell me the warm and fuzzy platitude, of treat people really, really well, go above and beyond, exceed customers' expectations. But that was so frustrating because, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Or they might even tell you the story of how the Nordstrom's clerk, when you came and wanted, a certain pair of shoes and they didn't have your size, would run down to their competitor in the same mall, Dillard's or Macy, buy them, they'll come and back and sell them to you. Like, that's an amazing story. But the frustration I always had is, how do I get my employee to do that? And would she do that tomorrow if the general manager wasn't there, or if I didn't get that same, associate,
right,
and I got someone else? So that's where I started really digging deeper. And so back to, what I like is, if we tell 100 employees to deliver genuine hospitality, that will be processed 100 different ways.
Absolutely.
But that's where we came up with the 5 E's, because now we made it black and white and not open for a personal interpretation. Genuine hospitality is eye contact, enthusiastic greet, ear-to-ear smile, engage and educate. Now we've removed, personal interpretation, just like go build a relationship with your customers or strangers or coworkers. Well, that's, you might nod. Hey, I nodded to her.
Right.
I built a relationship.
Yep.
I was friendly. I went above and beyond. Well, now we teach Ford. And now we can say, all right, Dave, I saw you having a conversation with your 3:00 meeting. What Ford do you know? And you might be like, none. Or you might be all rattled off. But now we've made it black and white. Oh, that's demonstrates you built a relationship. And so that's what I really like about working with and studying these great companies. They don't allow for personal interpretation.
Right.
All right, before we get any further, I want to show you or talk about these awesome t-shirts we have that say, let's create a customer service revolution. And we have them in all sizes, and they are the most comfortable thing.
They are cozy.
I love these.
Yeah, they're great.
We have short sleeve and long sleeve, and on the front it says, let's create a customer service revolution. And people love these. And we are going to give them away. So if you subscribe and then review the Customer Service Revolution podcast, you will go into an auction, a raffle, to win one of these shirts. So please go to any of your places you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and subscribe and review, and we will track that, and we will give away, while supplies last, these unbelievably comfortable, cool shirts that say, let's create a customer service revolution. We ready to get back?
Yeah, let's talk about Howard some more.
Okay, so Starbucks hasn't always had it easy. They had humble beginnings, they struggled, and then they exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And they were opening more than one store a day.
Wow.
Worldwide. I know they had more than 10,000 stores and 100,000, they call them partners, employees. The reason why they call them partners is because they have stock. From almost day one, you get stock. You have skin in the game, which is really cool. It goes back to his father, and he wanted to create a company his father would be proud of. But however, Starbucks was growing too fast. And one of my favorite painful quotes to fast growth is, nothing will ruin your company's customer experience faster than rapid growth. I mean, think about it. We used to, every company's like this. I remember, all three of my companies, in the early days, when we needed to hire a receptionist or, anyone, we'd interview 15 to 20 to find that one perfect person. Spend weeks, it's just considerable amount of time, and we'd find her or him. Now, fast forward 5-10 years later, and we need 50.
Right. We
need 100. Bigger companies, Starbucks needs, 1,000 because their growth, because they're opening up. They're acquiring. Now, I'm not talking about Starbucks, just businesses in general. You're growing, you're acquiring. My first business, we bought other salons, and now we have a melting pot of different cultures.
Right.
If we need 50 people, how many think we're interviewing? Right. 55,
sometimes 50,
right? And maybe why we had to interview 55 was because 5 didn't take the job, right? So we didn't hire the best. We hired the best of the group that was interviewing, right? That interviewed, and we took them. Not to mention, we're keeping the C- player who has a bad attitude.
Right.
We're keeping them around because we're growing. I can't afford to lose them. I need, 50 more employees. And so there's so much negative. We all want to grow, but there's so much negative.
It's so interesting, John, because if you look at our consulting practice, a good chunk, not all, but a good chunk of our client base comes from organizations that started to grow, reached a certain point in their growth and said, we need help.
Yeah.
So something is not right here. And actually, the cool thing about our show today is Starbucks is one of those, right? Starbucks called the DiJulius Group when they went through that same point in time that they couldn't replicate what they had been doing previously.
We worked with ATI Physical Therapy. At the time, they still might be the number one largest private physical therapy group. And they, went from a few hundred clinics to like almost 1,000. I want to say overnight. But it was through acquisition. They were buying all their competitors. And they were the same thing. They woke up one day and it wasn't the culture, the core values that, the original team had. I've experienced it, and, there's struggle with that. So Starbucks grew too fast and they compromised. So let's hear a little bit about this.
No company is immune from the impact of the recession, not even the one-time darling of Wall Street, Starbucks.
After 37 years of growth, Starbucks is struggling to put the mo back in its joke.
In a memo to his top executives, Howard Schultz admitted changes have led to a dilution of the experience and a loss of the romance and theater of Starbucks, opening the door to competitors. This must be eradicated.
So it's so interesting, and you got to give him credit, because I think where a lot of organizations struggle is they don't realize that is the issue, right? They don't realize that it's the growth that's actually hurting them. They don't realize that they're watering down the experience that at one point set them apart. Like you were mentioning before, when they had the opportunity to hire or interview 15 candidates for one position, they weren't able to replicate that anymore. And that's where they start to really have some issues.
And so, we talked about probably, and it's hard to say if it's it probably is the single most important thing if your company wants to be, world-class customer service organization, is executive sponsorship, right? We've harped on that. Well, Howard Schultz had stepped down during this time, and he was no longer the CEO. Might have been the chairman, but he was not active in the day-to-day operation. And during the struggle, he removed the current president, came back as the president. And one of the most interesting things, it's so funny how many people we work with or we meet, company business owners, they're in denial of our customer service. We could always be better, and the one thing we found is the best companies are paranoid. And so Howard Schultz, this is, you read about it in his books. I've talked about my books. He sends out a memo, company-wide memo, that's titled The Commoditization of the Starbucks Experience. And that's what, you're talking about. It's no longer what it was. What built us, it's gone away. When I walk into our cafes, our Starbucks locations, it's not the same. Everything from, didn't like the quality of the drinks to the emotional connections being made. And it was such an unbelievable, honest assessment that a CEO president would send, beating the crap out of his own company, right? And someone leaked it out to the public. And then, it went viral. And that didn't help. Now, Starbucks stock was crashing as it was, and that made it crash more. Like, look, the president recognizes it. But man, that inspired me so much. He wasn't sitting in an ivory tower saying, blame it on the economy.
Right.
Oh, it's 2008. Everyone is suffering. He said, no, we're suffering because we grew too fast. And we took our eye off the ball to what made us different.
Well, the other thing I think he realized too, and we talk about this all the time when we're either presenting or working with our clients, there is some research and some science that tells us that customer service leaders are a little more insulated from things going on, like an economy downturn or political messages out there, whatever that may be. They're a little more insulated from that. It's not that they're not affected at all. They're going to be affected just like all organizations, but not affected as badly as other organizations. And so I think Howard probably realized that as well, that the work that they had put in previous to this wasn't really taking effect, wasn't having that stronghold, because they were taking a bigger dip than they probably had anticipated.
Many of the examples that we are showing, like the service vision, will be at our website, tdg.click/podcast. So a lot of things we're discussing in episode 1 and episode 2 will be available, links and pictures and all that. So you definitely want to go to our website and check it out. All right, Dave, that brings us to the end of Howard Schultz, part 1.
John, these shows always fly by, but this one really flew by. We could talk about this for hours, and we will, because there's a part 2 to Howard Schultz, and that's coming next week.
Which is as good of information and clips and his brilliance and how it applies in our personal and professional world as a leader.
So much more great stuff to come next week. But before we go, just want to remind you, please, 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 go to tdg.click revolutionized.com/podcast, where you can subscribe, review, and share with your friends this great podcast, The Customer Service Revolution. And be sure to go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast to subscribe. And don't forget to review, because we have these great shirts John talked about before. Someone's going to win some of these. Might as well be you.
It says, let's create a customer service revolution. And best of all, these shirts, I can sleep in. I never want to take off, except for that they start to smell after a while. But man, are they comfortable shirts.
So thanks for joining us today on the Customer Service Revolution podcast. We will see you next week for part 2 of Howard Schultz.